back in 1990, I was for 3 counts of bank robbery over on the North Shores of Sydney, and and I just knew that I was in a world of pain. I knew that I was in a world of trouble. I knew that I was coming across a life-changing event that could sort of take me out of society. At that time, there was a change in sentencing. The New South Wales Sentencing Act had become, under Nick Grimes, become the truth in sentencing. There was no remission. So it didn't matter how well you behaved or anything like that. If you got 10 years, you're doing 10 years. And when I was at home and Kellyville, and a few coppers turned up there and arrested me, and they told me they wanted me for some armed robberies. And when I was doing the armed robberies at the time, it was always in the back of my mind. If I kept pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope, I was sooner or later, and the law of averages would say I'd get arrested, but I kept pushing it and pushing it until I got arrested. The reason why I was, doing the armed robberies in the first place, I had an extremely bad heroin addiction. So, and as a result of being sexually abused, and look, I'm not justifying that, but that's part of the story. But so coppers turn up, arrest me, and that was just something out of the movies. Like, I come across these cops, and they were full on. They were gangsters. They were full on gangsters, and they were boring it into me. I remember when I was robbing banks, I bought this really nice suit, and I remember the copper trying my suit on, going, "I'm going to get you 20 years in this," and laughing his head off, drinking one of my beers out of my fridge. And I'm thinking, the thought of having to do 20 years was really put me in a bad spot. It put me I'd become suicidal. I think suicidal ideology became my constant companion, because I thought, I mightn't have to do 20 years. I'll just go out that way. And, there was a lot of to and fro, and there was, in the league, a lot of blokes were coming back from court with really, because you'd be on remand, you're sitting on remand in prison, and blokes are coming back with some soul-destroying jail sentences. Well, for me, I decided, well, I'm going to escape. And so I started getting super duper fit and planning to escape. And I did escape. I went to Campsie Court one day and had a bit of luck. I escaped police custody, and 6 weeks later, I was caught up in the Northern Territory. And I thought I'd had some pressure in Sydney. I just amplified that pressure by 100, because, me and my co-accused were getting some really bad publicity in the media about, city slickers coming up the headlines would read, "City slickers coming up to show rednecks how to rob banks," and that. And I was thinking, I was saying to my mate, I said, this ain't going to end well, and, they're going to give us a big sentence up here. And we eventually went to court. In the interim, I was being housed in a segregation unit, isolation unit, which meant, because they thought I was going to escape, so I was in extreme high security. Anywhere I went leg shackled, I went handcuffed, and I had a German Shepherd dog following me, so I was under really tight scrutiny security-wise. I was isolated in a cell in darkness for 23 hours a day, with 1 hour exercise if I was lucky. They had control of the shower, so it would be like a 40-degree day, because it was in Darwin, Berrimah Correctional Centre in Darwin. And, if I was lucky, I'd get a cold shower every third or fourth day, and then back into a cell in complete darkness. Not even my bed was a concrete slab. I used to just jam, there was like a little bubbler in the cell. I used to just put a match in it and jam it, and so I'd flood a bit of water on the cell and just lay there for hours and hours. And there was nowhere to escape. There was no drugs to escape with. There was just my thoughts, and I was trapped in my head. And my head in that situation was like a torture chamber at times. And then I started to really learn how to sort of, I don't know, they call it meditation now. Meditation's this really funky word at the moment, you know what I mean? But I think I was doing that back in 1991. Whilst I was in custody up there, a cell door opened one day, and the screws, I call them screws, but the appropriate name for them is prison officers. One of them opened and said, "Have you got a brother Stephen?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, he's dead." And they just slammed the door in my face. And this was news that my brother had committed suicide whilst he was in custody. And I think, my actions had played a part. I was riddled with guilt that, my brother was a really law-abiding citizen. And I think, I blame myself. I thought, he was really ashamed for what I'd done. So I heaped another bunch of coals on top of my head and added some more pressure to me. And there was a lot of confrontations in that segregation unit with prison officers who thought, you know, it was their job to teach me a lesson. So, you know, they applied a lot of violence to me. Like, when I say that, oh, they give me a deal one day. They turned up this so-called riot squad and they said, you know, would you have a one-on-one fight with these officers? And I put bells on. And that turned into my, you know, entertainment there for a long time. You know, 5 days a week, they give me the weekends off, as their word. They say, we'll give you the weekends off to recover. So once a day, they'd open the door and I'd fucking fly out like this caged animal. When I look back on it, I just think, far out, that was so barbaric. When my mind was, it was like, you know, it was my entertainment for the day to have a fight with a prison officer. You know, and sometimes I won and sometimes I lost, and you know, and there was a good officer there that kept his part of the bargain when he said, you know what I mean, he said, there's no kicking, and if someone goes to the ground, it just stops, and which they stuck to it. Then one day, about 5 or 6 months into it, they opened the door and I didn't come out, and one of them popped their head in thinking I had some trick going on, and I was, you know, and this really good officer, when I say good officer, all he did was just show me a bit of decency, and he said, what's going on? I said, I ain't doing this no more. And he said, why not? I said, because you guys are getting too much joy out of it. No, I'm not. I'm getting nothing out of it, other than a little bit of entertainment for the day. And he goes, that's all you had to say. All you had to say is you've had enough. I was really big on it. I said, I didn't say I haven't had enough. I said, let's not go there. I said, I didn't say I haven't. I said, I'm just not doing this no more. I said, I'm not doing this no more. And court rolled on, and it was funny because that same officer said to me, he said, when you go to court, he told me something, and he saved my life. He said, when you go to court, he said, the roller door of the court's going to come open. When they open the back door, the officers are going to disappear. He said, if you run out in that street, he said, you'll get your head blown off. And I told my mate when we're going to court, I said, this is how this is going to play out. I said, we're going to go to court. I said, they're going to open the back of the van, they're going to take off, and the roller door is going to come open by accident. And I said, if we go, I said, we'll get knocked. I said, they were planning to kill us. And it all went down as they said, you know, as that officer told me. He said, mate, just don't go anywhere. And my mate said, let's go. And I said, no, mate. I said, I'm not going. We're going to go out there and we'll get shot. And pull in. Officers open the back of the cage of the prison van. Door goes open. No one's there. And all of a sudden, the roller door. I said, I'm just sitting here. So I sat there about 2 or 3 minutes. And then they turned up and they go, oh, what are you guys still doing here? And with a bit of a smirk on their face. I said, I don't know, you guys, I don't know, you made a bit of a mistake. That would have ended, mate. And old mate, he whispered to me as I was walking, he said, it wouldn't have ended well if you ran out of there. So that was the intent they had for us up there. And we went to court. We got the biggest sentences ever handed out in the Northern Territory for an armed robbery. When you go to court and you're getting sentenced, they use parodies. They'll go, oh, you know, John Smith robbed this bank. He got $50,000. He used a shotgun. And in this one, when they were using parodies, they were using home invasion, 2 women got raped, and our barristers and that weren't doing it. That had no relevance to our actual, because ours was deemed a high-end professional, actually executed bank robbery, which is like top-end chain, sort of up there with armored vans and that sort of stuff. And that's what, you know, and that's how it should have been sort of connected to any other crime. And they just, that's because they never had any bank robberies up there. It wasn't like Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. But anyway, we got 9 years of a non-parole period of 5 years, which was the biggest sentence handed out in the Northern Territory. And so I went back to the segregation cell, and then one day at 4 o'clock in the morning, they turned up and moved me to Alice Springs, where when I got to Alice Springs, you know, I had a really good officer down there. He said, mate, I'm just going to give you a fair go. He said, mate, don't know what. And he just said to me, you're in Alice Springs, mate. He said, unless you've got a fucking pilot's license where you can fly a helicopter, there's nowhere for you to go. If you run away out here, you will fucking die in the desert. And I just had enough. I was really beaten. I just wanted to get it over and done with. I got news that one of my co-accused in the bank robberies in Sydney received a sentence of 19 years with a non-parole of 16 years, meaning he had to do 16 years. So my heart sunk, and I was thinking, fuck, that's what I'm going to get. I'm going to have to do 15 or 16 years. And, you know, over a period of time, you just sort of try to put that in the back of your head, just living with that. And you try to avoid that fight. Like I've really ingratiated myself with, you know, education, reading books, trying to keep focused and keep positive. But what did come out of it was I made a commitment to myself as far as the drug use goes that I'd never get put in that position ever again. You know, no matter what come of it, I wanted to be drug free. So, you know, the Darwin experience put me in a position. By the time I left Darwin to get to Alice Springs, I was in about 18 months clean. Not that I would have had any opportunity because of the isolation that they had me in. But I'll tell you what, then, you know, 18 months in one of those isolation cells, no one to talk to, no stimulus whatsoever, no books to read, no nothing, just sitting there in your own thoughts, you know. I don't know, I put an iron rod in me like I'd never had before. I just came out of there and I look back on it now, I made it, no matter what I do in my life today, I made it through that. I wouldn't say I'm sane, but you know what I mean? It really gave me a steely resolve. And then I went to Alice Springs for about a year or so, and I got an interstate transfer back to New South Wales to face the music of, you know, I think by that stage it was 4 armed robberies and an escape. And man, I just had to play this game. It was like a game of chess, you know, like going to court. You know, I went before a judge at Penrith, and they had a judge there called Alan Saunders. His nickname was Slipper because he liked to put the boot in, and he liked to really give big sentences. And, you know, I went up there before him one day, and they were called sentence indications. So they'll say, if you plead guilty, this is what we're willing to give you. And this Saunders come from the bench, from underneath the bench. He just appeared like something out of a fucking horror movie, licking his lips. And like fucking just something like some goblet. And he said, I believe a sentence has been offered to the accused. And he said, no, I believe it's a very fair one. And it was 18 years with a non-parole period of 12 years, which I would have had to serve 12 years. And he said, and the barrister at the time saying, I think it's a good result, you should take it. And I just sat in. I said, I'm not taking that. I said, no. I said, I'm not taking that, because in some way, escaping was a good thing for me, because in that period of time, 2.5, 3 years, the sentences were sort of starting to sort of go to what they should be, you know what I mean, appropriate. Instead of all these big 20 and 30 year fucking jail sentences, they started to sort of adjust themselves to what they should have been. And anyway, I sacked this guy, and then I went back to the jail, and then I'll be honest with you, I was in tears, and I was a bit emotional. One of the boys seen me, he goes, hey, listen, he said, I've got a mate who's a barrister, he's really, really good, he's really, really fair. And it ended up becoming a bloke called Peter Zara, who ended up becoming the head judge at Downing Centre District Court, and a fine man he was. And he said to me, mate, how about, what would you, he said, I'm going to have to push a few buttons, we're going to have to play a game for a while. He said, but, you know, what about, you know, 14 years or a non-parole period of 6 years, man. And I said, mate, that's music to my ears, because that's at that stage I've done about 3.5 years, you know. And anyway, so one day we went to Parramatta Court, and he come down and he said, there's an offer on the table of a sentence of 15 years with a non-parole of 8 years. I said, let's take it, Pete. Because that time, you know, I was, you know, it was about 3.5 years into it, nearly 4 years into it. I was really beaten. It was really, I just would have been happy to know what I was doing. If I was going to do 8 years, you know, 3.5, 4 years in it, 4 to go, man, let's go. I know what I'm doing. A plan, like a plan education and sort of stuff like that. I was 3.5 years, 4 years clean, and my head was getting clear, and it was like music to my ears to hear that sort of sentence. And the process doesn't end there. It's like, okay, so I plead guilty in front of this judge. His name was Peter Denton. He was a really good judge, really fair, you know. When I say fair,
how did you like deal with that pressure though, like of going up against the judge and standing in the court, and like what was going through your mind and your body at the time of that?
It's nerve-wracking, because nothing's guaranteed. He could just turn around and say, no, I want to give you 20 years.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm shaking in my boots. I'm telling you, I'm shaking in my boots. I'm as nervous as hell, because this is life-changing. This is, you know, it's changing the trajectory of your life. You know, it could be what you get out in 20 years, you get out in 4 years. The unknown, living in that unknown for like 4 years, man, I'm telling you, I'll never want to experience that again. Living in the unknown, where you're like, it's like you don't know. Like at that stage, I don't know if I'm going to get out and have kids, or, you know, I didn't have kids at that stage. I didn't know, you know, if I'm going to get sort of, they're going to put the game over sign on me, and I'm going to have to do 20 years on the bottom. That's, you know, even though there was sentence indications, still sometimes at the last minute the judge turned around and said, no, I'm not giving you this. You pleaded guilty. You know, I'm going to give you, and you know, the deal was, I'm going to give you 8 years. I'm going to give you 20 on the bottom, meaning you have to serve 20 years. So that nervous pressure, I lived with that nervous pressure, not on that sentencing day. I lived that for 4 years.
Yeah.
Knowing that my life, man, it was like people can say, oh, you don't know what's going to go tomorrow, but there's a big saying that, like, you know, that's a lot different than knowing, am I going to land, if I'm going to spend 20 years in a concrete box, you know, because man, I was getting to the age where a lot of the jail itself was beating me. It was like I was seeing for what it was, all like, because I grew up, like, man, my heroes were bank robbers as a kid. Where I grew up, bank robbers were treated like returned servicemen. They were treated like war heroes. You get old John smoking his white ox, fucking, he'd push his daughter out like a criminal walking past the house and go, "There, Cheryl, that's the type of bloke you marry. At least you'll have a bit of a good time in your life with him." And that people were treated like, I mean it. Now, I grew up in Mount Druitt, 2770, and crims were treated like war heroes. They had the nice cars, the nice girls, the nice clothes, a fast life. You've seen them for 12 months, or if you're lucky, and then they disappeared for years. And I wanted to be like that. But I'll tell you what, when you get to the starting gates, or you're in the race itself, and the realization that, hang on, this is a waste, man. Like, I went in at 22 and got out at 30. There are a lot of years there. There were a lot of years, and I got out, and my mates were owning houses and had families, and oh man, and it was a lot to take. And I'm guilty of making comparison. I'm looking at my lives compared to them, and man, I got out of jail with half a dole check, no skills whatsoever. I didn't have a license, didn't know how to use an ATM, and I knew that stuff was coming. I seen in prison, you'd see these blokes get out, and they'd get out for 2 or 3 weeks and just come back to jail because they didn't know how to live out there. And I'd seen that, and I didn't want to become one of these blokes. So I'd done a lot of things like that. I learned to divert my mind, like, because if you think about that sort of stuff for too long, you become it, right? So you become it. If you just think if I start focusing on being on one of those crims that, being that crim that's, is out 2 weeks and can't back, I'm going to beat him. So I'm going to be that bloke. So, I don't know. I do it today. I'm really big on it. I started imagining I'm going to get out. I'm going to have a job. I'm going to be successful. I ain't going to be that guy. And I started to do it. What do they call it today? It's a hippie word for it today. But I was daydreaming of it happening, and I had to live in these dreams where, I'm going to get out. I'm going to have a good life. I'm going to meet the nice person. I'm going to have kids. And when I did get sentenced, like he gave me that sentence indication at Parramatta, and I got actually sentenced 6 months later. Really funny that day because he stuck to it. He gave me 15 years with a non-parole of 8 years. And I'd come down to the cells, and it was really funny because I come down to the cells at Campbelltown. There was a bloke in there crying because he just got 3 months. And he goes, "What'd you get?" And I said, "Oh, I got 15 years. I'm so happy." And he goes, "What?" This bloke, and I think I just snapped him straight. He goes, "I'm crying over 3 years, and you got 15 years." I said, "Yeah, I got 15 years. I've got 4 years to go, mate. I'm so fucking happy. I'm really, really happy, and at least I've got a future. I know where I'm going now. I'm planning to get out and become a personal trainer." And that's I don't know. Once you know that, like it was funny because my release date was the 28th of June. Yeah, and I had a purpose, had a release date, and I knew what I was doing. I knew where I was going, and that alleviated all of this pressure I had for the 4 years coming up to it. You know what I mean? It was like, being like a red hot piece of steel getting ducked into a bucket of water, and just cooling off. I was like,
yeah.
Now I know where I'm at.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.